When Clara Vale drove 96 cedar seedlings into the frozen Nebraska prairie, her neighbor told her she was making a trap. He said the snow would pile against those little trees, then seal her cabin shut. But Clara was not trying to stop the storm. She was teaching it where to put its weight. By the time the first blizzard found her claim, most of the county had already decided what she was: widowed, stubborn, and one bad night away from losing everything. They were right about the night. They were wrong about everything else. The first seedling went into the ground on October 6, 1891, 40 paces from the north wall of Clara Vale's cabin. The prairie around it was flat enough to make a person feel watched. Not by people, by distance. There was no forest to break the weather, no hill to lean against, no neighbor close enough to hear a scream once the wind started hard. Just a timber cabin, a low cattle shed, a hand pump, 2 children, and a woman whose hands had been raw since sunrise. Clara pressed Black Creek soil around the cedar's roots with both palms. The tree was barely higher than her knee. Against the sky, it looked ridiculous. That was when Jonas Pike's wagon slowed on the road. Clara knew the sound before she looked up. Jonas owned the quarter section west of hers, 3 teams of horses, a barn with painted doors, and the kind of confidence men get when their mistakes are large enough to be called experience. His wife, Etta, sat beside him with a wool scarf tucked under her chin. Jonas looked at the single tree. Then he looked at the stakes Clara had driven in 2 long crescents around the north and west side of the cabin. Not a fence, not a wall, a shape. A pattern the prairie men could not name. Jonas stepped down from the wagon and crossed to the turned earth. "Mrs. Vale," he said, in the voice people use when they are trying to sound kind and superior at the same time. "What exactly are you building?" Clara kept one hand on the cedar so the wind would not loosen it before the soil settled. "Shelter." Jonas looked at the rows of stakes. "Those sticks?" "Trees." "Those trees won't be trees for 10 years. They only need to be themselves this winter." That made Etta glance away, the way people do when they hear a sentence they plan to laugh about later. Jonas crouched near the first cedar. He tugged one branch between 2 fingers and let it snap back. "The northwest blow will fill this whole pocket," he said. "You put brush in a curve. Snow collects inside the curve. Door jams. Roof line loads. Then what? Your boy digs you out from the inside?" He stood and pointed toward the cabin. "You are building a drift chute straight at your own door." Clara's jaw tightened once, not from fear, from the work of keeping words inside. Because there were words for what she was doing. Good words, exact words. Porosity, velocity, drift capture, wind shadow. Words her father had put into her hands years before anyone in Dawes County cared what she knew. But Jonas Pike did not want knowledge. He wanted agreement. So Clara said only, "It won't make the storm weaker. We'll make the storm spend itself before it reaches the door." Jonas blinked. Then he smiled, not happily. Wind doesn't spend itself, Mrs. Vale. Wind takes. He turned back toward the wagon. Etta gave the cabin a pitying look. You ought to save your strength for firewood. Clara watched them leave until the wagon dipped behind a roll of grass. Then she turned back to the seedling. She had no strength to waste on humiliation. Every bit of it was already promised. Her husband, Abel, had died in June under a freight wagon outside Crawford, pinned beneath a load of milled pine that had shifted on a washout road. The men brought him home wrapped in canvas. Clara had not cried until after the children were asleep. Not because she was made of iron, because the cow still needed watering, the stove still needed banking, and grief on a homestead had to wait its turn behind chores that could kill you if ignored. What Abel left was a claim not yet proved. 3 months of flour, if stretched with cornmeal, a patched roof, a milk cow, 2 children, and a cabin placed with its broadside open to the worst wind in the county. Everyone knew what would happen next. A widow alone would sell, or fail, or marry fast, or be carried east by relatives who would speak of the prairie as if it had been a fever she survived. Clara knew it too. That was why she had drawn the first plan by candlelight on the back of Abel's freight receipts. Not a circle, a double crescent. The outer crescent stood 16 paces from the cabin, open to the south, with cedars spaced wide enough to let air through and close enough to tear the main wind into pieces. The inner crescent stood 9 paces from the cabin, staggered against the gaps in the first. The northwestern horn of the pattern curved heavier than the rest, because the storms did not come straight. They came slantwise. They came hunting corners. Clara knew this because she had listened. For 5 winters, she had listened to the roofline scream before the walls shook. Had watched snow build not where a person would expect it, but where moving air lost patience with its own burden. And long before Nebraska, she had learned the lesson in Maine. She had been 11 when her father took her into a spruce break during a coastal storm near the Penobscot woods. Outside the trees, the snow flew sideways so hard it cut her cheeks. Inside, the world changed in 6 steps. No miracle, no magic. Just branches. Thousands of them. Each one taking a little force from the wind until the wind no longer had enough strength to carry what it had brought. Her father, Elias Baird, was a woodsman who trusted trees more than boards, because trees bent and boards argued. He had knelt beside Clara in the stillness and pushed his hand into the soft snow at their feet. A solid wall makes wind angry, he said. A living screen makes it tired, and a tired wind drops what it carries. He pointed through the spruce trunks to the open slope beyond them, where the drift was climbing higher than Clara's waist. Never fight weather at its strongest point, girl. Make it do the heavy work after it has already lost its pride. That sentence stayed. Some lessons are remembered. This one became a tool. Abel had not believed in it. Not cruelly. Loved Clara. But like many men, he had thought love meant listening kindly before doing exactly what he had already decided. The first winter, he built a plank windbreak north of the cabin. A January storm peeled half of it out of the ground. The second winter, he rebuilt it taller. A heavier storm held snow against it until the drift pushed the boards inward and cracked 2 posts. The third winter, Clara said nothing. Silence became one more chore. Now Abel was gone, and for the first time in her married life, nobody in that cabin could overrule what Clara understood. Freedom came to her with a frightening shape, decision that could kill her children if she was wrong. Her son Peter was 8, with serious eyes, and a way of carrying kindling as if the survival of the household depended on each stick. Her daughter Nell was 5, and still small enough to believe every project was partly a game, until hunger or cold explained otherwise. They helped from the second week on. The cedars grew in a sheltered cut along Badger Creek, 2 miles north and down into a fold of land where the soil stayed dark even in dry months. Clara dug each seedling with as much root as she could keep. She wrapped the root balls in torn feed sacks. She loaded them onto Abel's handcart, hauled them home over frozen ruts that seemed placed by a malicious surveyor. By the 5th trip, the handles had worn blisters inside her blisters. By the 9th, her shoulder burned at night so badly she had to sleep sitting forward. By the 12th, Peter stopped asking whether they were almost done. He had learned that almost done was not a useful measurement. Nell's job was to pat soil around the smallest roots. She did it with great ceremony, then wandered off to inspect feathers, beetles, stones, or whatever small mercy the day offered. Clara let her. A child who can still be distracted by a beetle has not yet been fully claimed by fear. That mattered. By October 20th, 43 cedars were in the ground. By October 27th, 69. Every morning, Clara walked the crescents and tested the soil with her fingers. Every night, she adjusted the drawing. The pattern had to be wrong in the right direction. Too dense, and the wind would climb and dump too close. Too open, and it would rush through as if she had planted nothing. Too shallow a curve, and the storm would slide around the horn and strike the door from the side. She was not decorating the claim. She was writing instructions for a force that could not read, but could obey pressure. The first person who looked long enough to understand that was Miriam Brandt. Miriam was a widow too, though older, with a narrow back, calm eyes, and a face weather had treated like a ledger. She came with a covered pot of beans and set it on Clara's table without explaining kindness out loud. Then she stood at the doorway and studied the cedar crescents. Not the way Jonas had looked. Jonas had searched for the mistake. Miriam searched for the reason. "You are not closing yourself in," she said at last. Clara turned. That was the first true thing anyone had said about the work. "No." "Then what are you catching?" Clara told her. Not the short version, the real one. The main spruce break, the still air. The way a porous screen steals carrying power from wind without trying to defeat it. The way snow is not only danger, but material. The way a storm can build shelter if you arrange the first obstacle correctly. Miriam listened with both hands folded around the empty pot. When Clara finished, the older woman looked out at the little trees. "My brother's place sits naked on the north rise," she said. "Last winter, he lost one wall of the stable. 3 horses froze before morning." Clara did not offer comfort. Comfort would have been too small. Instead, she said, "If this holds, I will show him the plan, every pace of it." Miriam nodded. "It holds for more than you." Those words went into Clara deeper than praise would have, because until that moment, survival had been a room with only her children inside it. Miriam had opened a window. Then the northwest horn began to fail. 2 cedars planted nearest the corner turned yellow from the bottom up. Not all at once, worse than all at once, slowly. Each morning showed just enough decline to deny certainty and enough certainty to deny peace. Clara pulled them on November 2nd. The roots had not taken. The soil around them had crusted and lifted in the night freezes, leaving tiny air pockets where living roots needed contact. The same day with 2 smaller cedars from Badger Creek. But late planting was a debt. The Prairie always collected. That corner faced the storm track. If the trees failed there, the wind would find the opening and use it. Clara watered the replacements by hand for 8 mornings. She banked creek soil around the roots. She pressed straw into the ground as insulation. She did everything her father would have done. Then she did what he had warned every woodsman must learn to do. She stopped touching the thing before worry became damage. The last cedar went in on November 9th. 96 trees, 2 staggered crescents, 1 exposed cabin, 1 widow with no second plan. 1 exposed cabin, 1 widow with no second plan. By then, the story had reached the store at Hat Creek. Not the true story. Stories rarely travel with their bones intact. By the time Peter heard it, Clara had planted a charm around the house because grief had made her strange. A clerk said she was trying to grow a forest before Christmas. A freighter said Abel Vale would never have allowed such foolishness. Peter came home silent, carrying coffee, lamp oil, and shame that did not belong to him. At supper, he finally said, "Mr. Rusk said you need a man to tell you when to stop." Clara set down the ladle. The stove clicked softly. Outside, wind moved through the young cedars with a low, ragged whisper. "Mr. Rusk sells tobacco by the ounce," she said. "That does not make him a surveyor of storms." Peter considered this. Then he nodded and kept eating. But later, after Nell slept, Clara found him by the window, looking toward the dark shape of the cedar crescents. "Are they strong enough?" he asked. Clara stood beside him. She wanted to say yes with a mother's certainty, but children deserve truth when truth is survivable. "Not alone," she said. "Nothing out there is strong enough alone. The question is whether they can make the storm lean on itself." Peter looked up. "Can a storm do that?" "Everything heavy can be made to carry part of its own weight." 3 days later, Jonas Pite came back without his wife. No wagon this time, only a horse, a gray coat, and business in his eyes. Clara was splitting cottonwood near the shed. Jonas stopped at the edge of the claim and looked over the completed crescents. "I'll buy the place," he said. Not advice, not concern, an offer. "Fair price. Cash before first snow. You and the children can take the spring train east. Clara rested the mall head on the block. She understood him then more clearly than she had in October. Jonas did not only think she was foolish, he wanted her land before winter proved anything one way or the other. The claim is not for sale. It will be worth less after a hard winter. Then you should be grateful I am not asking you to buy it. His mouth tightened. For a moment, the prairie between them held more than cold. Then Jonas looked at the cabin, the shed, the children watching from the doorway. His voice dropped. When the door won't open, send the boy. Don't wait until the horse can't move. Then he rode away. Clara stood with both hands on the maul and let herself feel the fear after he was gone. Not because Jonas had planted it, because he had named the shape it already had. Winter did not arrive all at once. It narrowed. The sun lost warmth before it lost light. The pump handle burned the palm through wool. The grass stopped bending easily and began to rattle. The cedars changed too. Their green darkened, their branches stiffened. When the wind came northwest, Clara could hear the difference now. Above the outer crescent, the prairie wind made its usual long, cruel note. Inside the crescents, it broke into smaller sounds. A hiss, a mutter, a shivering, interrupted rush. Not silence, but not the same wind. Miriam came once more before the roads hardened fully. Clara brought her into the protected pocket and said nothing. Miriam closed her eyes. The wind pulled at the gray hair near her temples. Then, inside the second crescent, it let go. When Miriam opened her eyes, she did not smile. She simply said, "It is already learning." The storm came on December 14th. The morning was too still. That was the first warning. No birds in the scrub, no skitter of grass, no smoke leaning from the chimney. The sky hung low and colorless, like a lid placed over a pot that had not yet begun to boil. Clara brought in wood until there was no room to move easily along the north wall. She filled every bucket, kettle, crock, and pan with water. She carried extra hay to the cow. She checked the shed bar twice. Northwest horn of the cedar pattern. The two replacement trees stood dark and small in the stillness. She touched one branch. It bent. It returned. That was all the answer she was going to get. By late afternoon, the air had a taste like iron. At dusk, the first pressure hit the cabin. Not a gust, a shove. The walls creaked inward. The lamp flame leaned hard inside the glass. Nell began to cry. Clara lifted her onto the stool near the stove and put a blanket around her shoulders. "Listen," Clara said. Peter's face went pale. "To what? To what is missing?" At first, there was too much noise to hear absence. Roared across the prairie with a full-body sound, as if the whole night had become one animal breathing through its teeth. Snow struck the west wall in dry bursts. The stovepipe hummed. The door seams whitened with frost. But the roof line did not scream the way it had in other storms, not continuously. The north wall did not take the flat, punishing blows Clara remembered from winters before. The force arrived broken, changed, as if something outside had taken the first beating before the cabin did. Clara did not trust hope. Hope was useful only after evidence, so she cooked supper. She told the children the main story again. She trimmed the lamp. She listened. Near midnight, something cracked outside. Peter sat up from his blanket. Clara froze with one hand on the stove door. A branch, a roof plank, a cedar torn out by its roots. The sound gave no explanation. That was the cruelty of the system she had built. It could save them and still deny her the comfort of watching it work. She could not open the door. She could not inspect the northwest horn. She could only stand behind her work while the storm judged it in the dark. The first day passed, then the second. By the third, the storm had become less like weather than a condition of the world. The children grew quiet in the way children do when fear becomes ordinary. Clara made them count beans into piles, copy letters, mend a torn cuff, anything that proved time still had pieces. Outside, the wind kept throwing itself at the claim, but every hour Clara listened for the old sounds. The unbroken roof scream, the direct wall strike, the packed snow grinding against the door. They did not come. Or when they came weakened, intermittent, spent. 12 miles west, Jonas Pike was learning the same storm without Clara's cedars in front of it. His big barn held, but only after he and his hired man tied a chain across the center beams and braced the north doors with a wagon tongue. His cattle shed lost one corner. In the house, wind drove through a gap in the chinking so sharply that Etta stuffed the opening with 2 aprons and a quilt sleeve. Jonas sat awake most of the third night, listening to a force he had thought he understood. For the first time in years, he did not hear wind as one thing. He heard it searching. Edges, seams, weakness, openings. And sometime before dawn, against his will, he thought of Clara Vale's ridiculous little trees. On the 4th morning, Clara woke into silence. Not calm, silence. The kind that feels impossible after days of roar. She lay still for one breath, then another. Then she was moving. Boots, coat, gloves. Peter stirred. "Stay inside," she said. Her hand closed around the door bar. If Jonas had been right, the door would not move. If the northwest horn had failed, snow would be packed against it like stone. If Clara had mistaken one landscape's lesson for another, she would find out with both children watching. She lifted the bar. She pushed. The door swung free. No shove, no scraping drift, no weight. Just pale morning light and cold so clean it seemed newly made. Clara stepped outside. For a moment she could not understand what she was seeing. The space around the cabin held only a hand's depth of soft powder, 4 inches, perhaps 5. Snow that had fallen from still air. Not packed, not weaponized. Beyond the inner crescent, the storm had built the rest. A white wall rose along the outer cedar line, smooth and curved and higher than the cabin windows. At the northwest horn, where Clara had feared failure, the drift climbed thickest of all, shouldering around the two late-planted cedars and sealing the weak place with dense, wind-packed snow. The storm had found the gap. Then it had filled it. The cedars were bent under the load, but not gone. Their green tops pushed through the wall like living nails. Clara walked toward them slowly. Her boots sank a few inches and stopped. Inside the crescents, the air was different, still. A few degrees warmer on her face. The wind continued overhead, faint and high, traveling across the top of the drift as if the real fight had moved above her roof. She reached the northwest horn and put one gloved palm against the snow wall. It was solid. It was real. It was not what she had built. It was what she had persuaded the storm to build after she gave it the right work. Behind her, the cabin door opened. Peter stood with Nell tucked against him. They stared at the wall, the trees, the untouched door. The chimney smoke rising straight before the overhead wind caught it. Peter's mouth opened once before words arrived. "It carried itself," he said. Clara turned. He had understood it. Enough. "Yes," she said. Her voice nearly broke, so she made it plain. "It carried itself." 2 days later, a horse came through the white silence. Clara heard it before she saw it, the hard, tired breathing of an animal fighting belly-deep snow. Jonas Pike appeared beyond the drift line, dark against all that brightness. He rounded the outer wall and stopped. For a long time he did not dismount. From where he sat, the Vale cabin must have looked impossible. A poor widow's claim, not buried, but guarded. A smoke column lifting from the chimney, a clean doorway. Wall of storm-built snow holding the north side like a fortification no hired crew could have raised in 3 days. Clara did not call to him. Some evidence speaks better when left alone. Jonas finally climbed down and waded toward the opening. The moment he crossed into the cedar pocket, his face changed. Not much. Enough. His skin felt what his pride had not permitted him to imagine. The wind was above him, not on him. He looked at the cedars, then at the wall, then at the cabin door. "I told you it would bury you," he said. His voice was rough. Clara waited. Jonas swallowed. "It buried everything but you." She went inside and brought out 2 mugs of coffee, not because he deserved ceremony, because a man who has just lost certainty is less dangerous if his hands are full. They stood in the protected pocket and drank without speaking. Above them, the remaining wind brushed the top of the snow wall with a thin, distant sound. At last, Jonas said, "How did you know?" Clara looked at the cedars, at the 2 weak trees that had survived because the very pressure aimed at them had become their reinforcement. "I did not know," she said. "I understood enough to make a wager." "On trees that small?" "On wind that tired." He nodded slowly. It was not apology, not yet, but it was the first honest motion he had made toward her. "Come in spring," Clara said. "When the snow pulls back, I will show you the spacing, the soil, where the drift formed first." Jonas looked at her. Pride moved in his face, searching for a place to stand. Then it stepped aside. "I will come." Miriam Brandt arrived 4 days later, walking on the crusted snow with a willow staff. She stood inside the crescents and placed both hands on the snow wall. Her eyes filled, though she did not let the tears fall. "My brother will need this," she said. "So will others." Clara nodded. "Then they can have it." By January, people came to see. Some came because they believed. "So will others." Clara nodded. "Then they can have it." By January, people came to see. Some came because they believed. Most came because disbelief gets curious when smoke is rising from a cabin that should have been sealed shut. They measured the distance from cedar to cabin. They pressed their boots into the soft powder inside the pocket and then into the hard drift outside it. They stood where the air changed and pretended not to be impressed. A few said the land must have done it. A few said it was luck. A few said the storm had blown strangely. Clara let them talk. She had learned something from the Cedars. You do not have to stop every force that passes through you. Sometimes you only have to make it leave behind what it cannot carry. In March, when thaw exposed the roots, Miriam brought her brother Thomas. He was broad, quiet, and skeptical in the useful way of men who want the mechanism more than the miracle. He crouched at every cedar, measured the stagger, dug a small cut into the drift line, studied how the densest snow had formed not at the door, but along the outer curve. At the northwest horn, he paused beside the 2 trees Clara had almost lost. The soil there was darker than anywhere else, packed all winter under the heaviest snow load and released slowly into spring moisture. The weakest section had become the richest. Thomas removed his hat. "My stable stood with its back to the wind," he said. "I thought that was enough." "A back still takes a beating," Clara said. "A screen makes the beating lose shape before it arrives." Thomas looked across the prairie. "How many would I need?" Clara smiled for the first time that day, not because she was pleased to be right, because the question had changed. No one was asking whether the work was foolish now. They were asking how to begin. That September, 5 homesteads cut cedar from Badger Creek. The next year, 12. Not every planting worked. Some rows were too tight and trapped snow in the wrong place. Some families planted too close to the door. Trees failed because men in a hurry stripped the roots bare and called the dead sticks proof that the idea was weak. Clara corrected what she could. She made Peter pace the distances with a rope. She taught Nell to test root balls for living soil. She showed farmers how to angle the horn toward the true storm track, not toward the direction they wished the wind came from. That was the lesson most people resisted. Weather did not care about the map in a man's head. It only answered the shape placed in front of it. By the 3rd winter, the road past Clara Vale's claim no longer looked naked. Small cedar breaks marked the homesteads like dark stitching across a white cloth. Not forests, not yet, but beginnings. The county still had blizzards, doors still iced, Roofs still groaned. Loss did not vanish because one woman understood one principle. But fewer cabins stood alone in the full mouth of the northwest wind. Fewer families woke to snow packed against the only exit. Fewer storms found a claim with nothing in front of it but pride. Years later, when Peter was grown and the cedars around the old cabin had risen higher than the roof, people told the story badly. They said Clara Vale beat the blizzard. They said she outsmarted winter. They said she built a wall of trees. Peter would correct them when patience allowed. His mother had not beaten the blizzard. She had never claimed to. She had understood something harder and more useful. A storm does not need to be defeated to be changed. A force does not have to become kind to become useful. And sometimes, survival depends on knowing the difference between a wall that tries to stop the world and a living screen that makes the world set down its burden before it reaches your door.